A millionaire was at a lavish gala when he received a frantic call from his daughter who shrieked, "Mom brought another client home." Stunned, the millionaire immediately left the gathering and rushed home simultaneously, dialing 911 only to find the air was thick with the scent of high-end perfume and the delicate chime of crystal glasses at the Plaza Hotel Grand Ballroom in New York. Robert Sterling stood at the epicenter of the year's most prestigious fundraising event, yet his thoughts drifted far away. The man had founded the massive tech empire Sterling Tech, but his eyes reflected an emptiness, a fatigue no gilded business card could ever mask. The superficial handshakes and the programmed corporate smiles, they all just made Robert long to be home, where his young daughter Lily was likely already tucked in and dreaming. His hand unconsciously gripped his phone inside his jacket pocket, a clear violation of the unspoken high society rule about unplugging at these types of gatherings. But Robert didn't care. This was the only tether holding him to Lily, the 6-year-old he only managed to quickly kiss on the forehead each morning before she fully woke up. The phone vibrated fiercely, shattering the forced stillness in his chest. The screen flashed the words, "Lily, home." Robert placed his drink on the tray of a passing server so fast that the liquid sloshed over the rim. He didn't bother to apologize or even turn back toward the partner who was endlessly droning on about stock options. Instead, Robert strode quickly toward a quieter hallway where soft golden light washed over expensive oil paintings. "Hey, princess," Robert answered, his voice automatically shifting to a warm, low tone, a relieved smile already forming. "Skipping the nanny again to call daddy? Did your teacher today?" But his sentence was abruptly cut short by a strange sound. It wasn't the usual bright, bubbly giggle. It was a choked, labored gasp, as if someone was desperately trying to pull air into a small, confined space. "Daddy!" Lily's voice came through tiny and broken, piercing the speaker like a needle straight to his heart. "Please come home. Mom brought another client home again." The smile vanished from Robert's face. His hand, which had been reaching to loosen his tie knot, froze in midair. A client, Victoria, never brought business associates to the penthouse. The family's residence was their absolute private sanctuary. "What are you saying, Lily? What client at this hour?" Robert asked, trying to keep his voice level, but his fingers had already begun to tremor. Lily's sobs echoed clearly, accompanied by the rumble of thunder from the downpour, hitting the New York windows outside her room. "This time the man has a long leather cord, Daddy. It looks just like the one in that cowboy picture you won't let me see." The blood in Robert's body turned to ice. Leather cord. Client. "Mommy made me put on that nightgown I dislike so much." Lily's voice shifted to a panicked, hurried whisper, as if she feared being discovered. "I'm cold. I'm hiding in the closet, but I'm afraid she's going to find me." The glittering world around Robert collapsed. Those words came together to paint a terrible picture that no father could bear to imagine. His wife Victoria, the woman who always appeared on magazines as the perfect mother, was doing what with their daughter Robert didn't say another word. He spun around, charging toward the main exit. He shoved hard through the heavy revolving glass door, nearly colliding with a security guard who tried to greet him. Robert swept the man's arm away, leaving behind the chaos and the astonished stares of New York's elite. Instead of waiting for the valet to bring his car up to the lobby, Robert sprinted down the ramp to the parking garage. He found his black sports car sitting quietly in a dark corner. His trembling hand fumbled with the key in the ignition, taking 2 tries before he could get the engine to catch. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest aching from the volcano of fury erupting inside him. The engine roared to life with a screech echoing throughout the vacant garage. Robert threw the car into gear and floored the accelerator. The car shot out of the garage, tearing through the New York night rain. "Call 911!" Robert barked at the car's system, his voice strained and out of control. 911, what is your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was chillingly calm. "I need to report an urgent situation, penthouse at 1 Fifth Avenue." Robert shouted, his eyes glued to the slick, rain-drenched road ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "My daughter's in peril." There's an unknown person in my home. It might be a situation of child mistreatment. Please hurry." "Sir, please calm down. Are you currently at the location?" Robert didn't answer. He swerved violently, the car tires squealing softly on the wet asphalt, before he shot onto the empty freeway lane. His headlights cut through the solid darkness, but they weren't enough to dispel the gloom enveloping his mind. The windshield wipers shrieked frantically, struggling to clear the external chaos, but failing to wipe away the heavy fog clouding Robert's mind. The speedometer needle was well past the 100 mph mark, the sports car hurtling forward like a cornered, wounded creature. Every time he darted past a slower car, Robert felt his stomach clench, not because of the speed, but because of the regret surging up like acid. He glanced at the empty passenger seat where there should have been Lily's toys, or at least some trace of her childhood presence. But no, this car was pristine and soulless, much like the relationship between him and his daughter. "Darn it, Barnaby. What in the blazes have I been doing?" Robert slammed his fist on the steering wheel. A memory from her birthday 2 months ago flooded back. He had been so busy with a crucial corporate merger that he forgot to pick out a gift. Finally, he threw a check at his assistant and told him to buy the most expensive, most technologically advanced toy available. The result was Barnaby, an AI robot teddy bear. He even proudly showed it off to his business partners as a piece of cutting-edge technology that could converse and learn like a real person. But now, the image of Lily alone in the enormous penthouse, clutching a cold metallic bear instead of being held by her father, was heartbreakingly clear. He had used money to buy his own free-time-use technology to fill the void of fatherhood, and his wealth, the layers of state-of-the-art security, the highly paid nannies. All of it was meaningless when the danger came from the one person he should have been able to trust the most, her mother. Robert reached for his phone and redialed the landline at home. Only the endless ringing sound. He switched to calling Lily's tablet. Still silence. A silence more terrifying than 1,000 words, making his imagination conjure up visions of the strange man ripping the tablet away, leaving Lily cowering before that dark, threatening cord. "Pick up, sweetheart! Please pick up!" Robert yelled, his voice cracking. The navigation screen flashed a stark red number. 15 minutes appeared. Traffic. New York never slept, and tonight it seemed determined to block his path home. The rows of blazing red taillights ahead were an impenetrable wall of fire. Without hesitation, Robert swerved hard to the right. The car roared the tires, cutting into the pebbled shoulder as he sped onto the emergency lane. Horns blared in protest from the cars he cut off, but Robert ignored them all. Suddenly, flashing blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror. The unmistakable wail of the NYPD siren tore through the rain. They were pursuing him. Instead of slowing down, Robert rolled down his window. The wind and rain stung his face, but he didn't care. He held up his Distinguished Citizen badge, an honorary item he received after donating millions to the city police fund, out the window, pointing straight ahead with his other hand and screaming, "Lead the way, I have an emergency situation, escort me." Perhaps the officer in the patrol car recognized the vehicle, or recognized the desperation in the voice of one of the city's most powerful men. The siren changed its pitch. The police car sped up, pulled in front, and began clearing the lane. The pursuit morphed into a frantic motorcade slicing through the avenue toward the towering skyscraper that glittered like a needle piercing the night sky. The sports car burned rubber, screeching to a halt right in front of the building's lobby, leaving a smoking black tire mark on the wet granite. Robert didn't bother to turn off the ignition or close the door. He bolted out like a bullet, leaving the barrel just as the police car screeched to a halt behind him. "Mr. Sterling, you can't..." The building security guard tried to intervene, following protocol. Robert brushed him aside without a word of explanation. His finger hammered repeatedly on the call button for the private elevator, the one reserved only for the owner of the penthouse suite. Ding. As the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Robert burst onto the thickly carpeted hallway. Behind him, The heavy footsteps of two police officers echoed, their hands already resting on their holstered support devices, ready for a break-in to a criminal hideout. But to Robert, this wasn't a crime scene. This was his home where his daughter was waiting for rescue. He stopped before the intricately carved oak door, taking a deep breath of the familiar polished wood scent, now reeking of betrayal and peril. Without a key, Robert stepped back, preparing to use all his strength to shatter the last barrier separating him from the harsh truth inside. The heavy oak door rattled violently under the impact. Robert no longer felt the pain in his shoulder. The adrenaline in his blood masked everything. With the help of the two police officers behind him, the deadbolt burst with a dry crack. The door swung wide open, and Robert plunged into the darkness inside, like a whirlwind, ready to tear apart anyone who dared to harm his daughter. The vast living room was cloaked in an eerie, dim light. Robert's eyes darted around frantically. And then he saw it. Lily was huddled on the red velvet sofa in the middle of the room, small and trembling like a fragile, broken bird. She wore the thin, pitiful nightgown, her face stained with tears, her eyes wide with fear, staring up at the towering dark figure in front of her. A strange man stood there, his hand raised high, holding a long, dark object pointed directly at his daughter's head. "Stay away from her!" Robert's shout tore through the silence. He charged forward without thought, without calculation, driven only by a powerful protective instinct. Behind him, the police officers simultaneously drew their support devices, shouting, "Police, put your hands up now!" Poof! A sudden blinding flash of light erupted from the corner of the room, so intense that Robert had to squint, freezing mid-stride. The entire room was instantly illuminated as bright as day under powerful stage lights. "Cut! Stop the scene!" "Are you insane, Robert?" Victoria's shrill voice rang out, not a cry for help, but a furious, angry shriek. Robert blinked repeatedly to adjust to the light, and as the image before him slowly focused, all his rage transformed into utter bewilderment. The long, dark object in the man's hand was not a whip nor a club. It was a fuzzy professional microphone boom attached to a long stand. The strange man, Mr. Groy, with his long tied-back hair and scruffy artist's clothes, lowered the professional video recorder from his shoulder. He let out a long, dramatic sigh, his face contorted with annoyance, as if someone had just trampled on his artwork. "Oh, for heaven's sake, the emotion is completely gone," Mr. Groy grumbled, turning to Victoria. "I told you to make sure the door was secured." Victoria emerged from behind the lighting setup. She was still wearing her luxurious silk pajamas, her face made up in a natural style that was perfect, down to the smallest detail. Showing no hint of panic, she hurried over to Lily. She bent down, smoothed the wrinkles in the child's nightgown, and gently brushed her messy hair back into place. "What in the world are you doing?" "Robert," Victoria turned to her husband, her eyes wide with reproach and disappointment, as if he had just committed an unforgivable blunder. "You brought the police here to ruin the most important audition of her life." "Audition?" Robert stammered, his head spinning. He looked from the video recorder to the trembling Lily, and then back to his wife. "What in the blazes are you talking about?" She said a strange man, a cord. "It's a prop, a performance prop, Robert." Victoria cut him off, gesturing toward the scattered equipment. "We are filming a casting video for a new reality show about children dealing with social pressure. Lily needs to show the most genuine distress. I worked so hard to get Director Groy to come here, and you ruined everything because of your delusion." Robert stood frozen in the lavish living room. His breathing was still heavy, but his heart felt squeezed tight. He looked at Lily. She was still sitting there, her small shoulders shaking. He waited for her to look up, to run into his arms and say that this was all just her mother's lie. He waited for a look of desperation. "Lily," Robert called softly, taking a hesitant step closer. But Lily did not look at him. She stared down at her hands, which were tightly clasped together, and slowly leaned into Victoria's embrace, clinging to her mother's shirt as if it were the only lifeline in a vast ocean. This action was a judgment against Robert. In this bizarre family portrait, he had suddenly become the aggressive intruder, the lunatic father who had broken the artistic dream of his wife and daughter. The two police officers exchanged glances, slowly lowering their support devices. The tension of a hostage rescue situation suddenly dissipated, replaced by the awkwardness of a typical petty domestic dispute common in this wealthy neighborhood. "Mr. Sterling." The older officer cleared his throat softly, holstering his device. "It appears this is a misunderstanding." Robert didn't answer. He stood isolated in the middle of the room, the spotlight still shining directly on his face, harsh and exposing, stripping bare the utter helplessness and confusion of a father who had just realized he was completely lost in his own home. A few minutes later, the two police officers exchanged looks of shared pity and the weariness of men who were all too familiar with the pointless squabbles of the affluent. They put away their radios and approached Robert with a polite yet distant demeanor. "Mr. Sterling," the older officer said, his voice monotone as if reading a report. "We've conducted a brief assessment. There are no signs of illegal entry, no injuries, and this gentleman has valid documentation confirming his employment. Perhaps you should get some rest." Robert didn't respond. He stood motionless, his arms hanging limp. He watched the backs of the two officers walking toward the elevator, feeling as if his last hope was vanishing with their every step. The elevator doors closed with a dry click, leaving him stranded in the magnificent yet cold living room, facing Victoria, the perfect wife and mother who was now standing with her arms crossed. The smile had disappeared, replaced by the steely gaze of a predator who had just backed its prey into a corner. Victoria waved her hand, signaling to Mr. Groy. The long-haired man understood, lowering his camera but remaining in place like a silent witness to the scene that was about to unfold. She walked slowly toward Robert, the sound of her heels tapping regularly on the hardwood floor, each step like a nail being driven into his self-esteem. "You see, Robert," Victoria hissed, her bright red manicured finger pointing directly at his chest. "Your paranoia just made this family the laughingstock of the city. The police were here, and what will the papers write tomorrow? Tech millionaire Robert Sterling goes insane over jealousy? Did you ever think about my reputation, or your daughter's?" Robert inhaled deeply, taking a step back to avoid the finger jabbing at his chest. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Lily. The little girl was still huddled on the sofa, small and heartbreakingly alone. He desperately sought an upward glance, a blink, any sign that she was silently asking him for help. But no, Lily just stared down, her small shoulders trembling as if she was trying to shrink until she disappeared completely from this world. "I work hard day and night," Victoria continued, her voice ringing out, full of false grievance but sharp as a razor. "I sacrificed my acting career. I stayed home to raise her. I sought every opportunity to build her future. And you are constantly absent. How many times a month are you home? What do you know about her dreams? What do you know about her talent that you dare to judge?" She pulled a stack of papers from her handbag and slammed them onto the table. Contracts and scripts fluttered everywhere, scattering across the floor like fragments of a shattered dream. "Look at this, Reddit," Victoria yelled. "This is a casting contract for an independent film about children under social pressure. Director Groy is well respected in the industry. He saw Lily's natural talent. She could become a star, an icon. And you, the terrible, selfish father, you nearly ruined everything because of your pathological ego." In the corner of the room, Mr. Groy gathered his tangled wires, clicking his tongue and adding fuel to the fire. "It's truly a shame, Mr. Sterling. Young Lily has an extraordinary ability to embody a role. I've never seen a child perform a scene of fear so genuinely. But this interruption, well, it broke the emotional flow. Art requires continuity, you understand. Your lack of professionalism is a major impediment." Robert brushed aside his wife's accusations. He didn't care about Groy art or fame. He quickly walked to the sofa and knelt before his daughter. "Lily." Robert called softly, his voice low and urgent. "Look at me, sweetie. Tell Daddy the truth. Do you really want to do this? Is someone forcing you? You don't have to be afraid. I'm here now." Lily slowly lifted her head. Her swollen red eyes darted quickly toward Victoria. Her mother stood there, arms crossed her face, frozen, her gaze sharp as a knife held to a throat. It was not a look of motherly love, but an unspoken command, a silent but heavy threat. Lily shivered. She quickly pulled her hands away from her father's touch as if touching fire. She bowed her head, her voice tiny and shaky, sounding like a parrot reciting an old lesson. "No, no one is forcing me. I like performing Daddy. I was just practicing crying for the part. You're distracting me too much. Please go away." His daughter's answer was like a bucket of ice water thrown in Robert's face. He stood up, reeling backward. A feeling of complete helplessness overwhelmed him, suffocating and painful. He realized he was utterly isolated. In his own home, he had become the enemy, the villain, hindering the path to glory for his wife and daughter. His wealth, his power outside, meant nothing when he couldn't protect his only child from her own mother. Victoria smirked a triumphant and scornful smile. She waved her hand as if dismissing an irritating fly. "You heard her, didn't you? Now please go back to your office. Make space for the art. Don't bother us anymore." She then turned her back on him, signaling Mr. Groy to continue their work, completely ignoring the presence of the husband, who was frozen in shock in the middle of the room. Robert retreated slowly, step by step, toward the dark hallway leading to the bedrooms. His eyes remained fixed on Lily. It was late, and the storm outside seemed exhausted after its furious outburst. Only the soft drizzle of rain tapping against the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows remained. The silence was frightening, the calm after the storm, often carrying the weight of unresolved matters. Mr. Groy had left long ago, leaving an empty space and the faint smell of cigarette smoke in the living room. Robert stood outside Lily's bedroom door. His shadow stretched long on the hallway floor, solitary and hesitant. His hand rested on the cold metal doorknob, but he didn't turn it immediately. He was afraid to face her silence, afraid to see that look of avoidance again. But the creeping anxiety, the vague unease in his chest, urged him to check on her. He took a deep breath and gently turned the knob. The door opened smoothly without a sound. The dim light from the moon-shaped nightlight illuminated Lily's innocent face as she lay on her large bed. Her breathing was steady, her chest rising and falling softly, suggesting she had drifted into a deep sleep after a tumultuous, tear-filled evening. Robert crept closer, his footsteps barely audible. He pulled the velvet blanket higher, tucking her in, careful not to wake her. His gaze settled on Lily's small hands. Even in sleep, she maintained a tight grip. Her small fingers were fiercely wrapped around the AI robot teddy bear Barnaby, pulling it close to her chest, as if fearing someone might steal her only friend. Suddenly, Robert squinted. In the dim light, he noticed an unusual bright spot. On the bear's shiny black plastic eyes, a fierce red LED indicator was blinking. The intense red signal was like an emergency warning, a stark contrast to the peaceful look of the bedroom. A jolt ran down Robert's spine. Memories flooded back as clear as yesterday. He recalled a meeting with his chief engineering team 3 months ago when they discussed the safety features for this high-end line of AI toys. He, as an ever-worried father, had insisted on installing a special feature. The indicator light would activate when biosensors registered a child's heart rate, exceeding a prolonged panic threshold, acting as a silent call for help that only the parent would understand. Suspicion flared up inside Robert, overriding his previous guilt and bewilderment. He stared intensely at the blinking red light. Lily's heart rate, even in deep sleep, was still at a red alert level. What did that mean? Was she having a nightmare? Or was the fear from the evening still haunting her, seeping into her dreams, preventing her small body from relaxing? For even a second, Robert reached out and gently touched her forehead. It was cold. A layer of cold sweat covered her forehead and neck. Lily whimpered softly, making inarticulate, choked sobbing sounds, her brow furrowed in pain. The light in the bear's eye blinked faster, more frantically. She hadn't been acting. This fear was real. This panic was real. A thought flashed through Robert's mind, clear and sharp. He couldn't wake her now. He couldn't alert Victoria, who was asleep in the next room. He needed proof. He needed to understand what was truly happening behind the closed doors of this house when he was away. Robert decided to act. He bent down gently and patiently, peeling Lily's fingers away from the teddy bear one by one. She whimpered softly in protest in her sleep, her hands reaching out instinctively. Robert quickly replaced the bear with a soft bolster pillow. Lily hugged the pillow, buried her face in it, and settled back down. As he picked Barnaby up, Robert was startled. It was warm. Not the warmth of Lily's body, but the heat radiating from the internal processor. This bear had been running continuously at high capacity, recording and processing the surrounding environmental data for hours without rest. It had seen everything. It had heard everything. He hid the bear inside the flap of his vest, pressing it tightly against his side. His eyes quickly scanned the dark hallway, his ears strained for any sound. Robert quickly retreated from his daughter's room, closing the door softly, the click of the latch sounding like a quiet sigh. His footsteps were quick but silent on the wooden floor, gliding past the expensive wall paintings he had never truly noticed. He headed straight for his private study at the end of the hall, a room equipped with the highest level of soundproofing and security in the entire penthouse. It was where he ran his tech empire. Upon entering the study, Robert immediately locked the door. He walked to his reinforced glass desk and placed Barnaby on it. The red LED light was still blinking like a bleeding heart, urging him on. Robert opened a drawer and retrieved a specialized connection cable. His hand trembled slightly as he plugged the cable's end into a hidden port behind the bear's back. The massive computer screen flared to life. Robert took a deep breath, preparing to face the dark secrets hidden inside this inanimate toy, preparing to perform the most critical digital surgery of his life to find the truth for his daughter. The dry clack of the mechanical keyboard echoed in the still space of the study, sounding like snapping bones in the middle of the night. Robert sat there, back straight, but shoulders slumped, the cold blue light from the massive computer screen casting shadows on his face, highlighting his tense features and dark-rimmed eyes. The black connection cable ran from the hidden port behind Barnaby's back to the computer's hard drive like an IV drip, but what it transmitted was not life, but the secrets that were slowly killing his soul. The screen flashed the Sterling Tech logo momentarily, before giving way to a complex admin interface with streams of command lines cascading down like digital waterfalls. Robert didn't bother checking the battery status or updating the software as he normally would. His fingers flew across the trackpad, skipping past the entertainment folders, accessing the highest level encrypted data partitions, emotional log, and environmental audio recordings. A graph appeared, filling the main screen. Robert held his breath. Jagged red lines spiked, dense and chaotic. This was Lily's heart rate graph for the past 6 hours. If this were just an acting session, if Lily were truly just practicing crying, as Victoria claimed, her heart rate would have breaks periods of calm when the director yelled, "Cut." But no. The graph before Robert was a continuous mountain range of panic. Sharp peaks extended throughout the entire late afternoon and evening, perfectly coinciding with the time he received the call and even the moment he broke down the door. The human body does not lie. These biological indicators were the strongest evidence that his daughter was not performing. She had been living in a state of extreme distress, a primal fear that made her small heart beat fast enough to burst through her chest. Robert felt a lump forming in his throat. He swallowed hard, trying to fight back the rising nausea. His trembling hand moved the cursor to the list of stored audio files. Barnaby's AI system had automatically categorized and tagged the recordings based on noise level and sensitive keywords. Robert stopped at a file recorded at 7 p.m. 2 hours before he came home. The The file title was just a date and time sequence, but it carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. He grabbed his specialized noise-canceling headphones and put them on. The outside world faded into silence, leaving only him and the cold screen. His index finger pressed the play button. A slight static sound came, first followed by an audio so clear it felt as though he was standing right in the living room. There was no director shouting "action," no artistic direction being given. The first sound that entered Robert's ears was a choked, deep sob, the labored gasping of a child trying to suppress her crying, but failing. "Mommy, I'm so tired. My tummy hurts." Lily's voice sounded weak, interspersed with hiccups. Immediately after, another voice cut in, sharp and stern like the snap of a whip. It was Victoria's voice. But not the sweet, simpering tone she usually used to coax him into buying jewelry or the artificially elegant tone of her video streams. This was the voice of a warden. Hurt what you swallow those tears right now," Victoria hissed through clenched teeth. "Look at your face. All swollen like that, how are you supposed to look good on camera? I told you to cry beautifully, not to sound like a pig being slaughtered." Robert squeezed his eyes shut, his hands clenching the armrest of his chair so hard the leather upholstery wrinkled. The sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden floor echoed in his headphones. "Get up, sit over there, Mr. Groy is about to arrive. If you mess this up today, if you don't perform that scene about being abandoned by your father convincingly, don't blame me for being mean." "I don't want to lie." Lily's plea was tiny, like a mosquito's buzz. "Daddy loves me. Daddy bought Barnaby for me." A loud bang thud, as if someone had slammed their hand on a glass table. Robert jumped, his heart constricted. "Love you think your father loves you?" Victoria's voice became menacing, low and terrifying, every word spitting venom. "Your father only loves money, sweetie. If you don't earn him money, if you don't satisfy Groy so Mommy has something to sell, your father will kick both of us out of this house immediately." In the study, Robert shook his head wildly. "No, that's not true. I would never," he whispered, as if trying to clear his name with the daughter in the recording. But the Victoria in the headphones continued, cruel and cold. "Do you know how people live out there? Do you want to be a beggar child, sleeping in the park, soaking in the rain, getting bit by sewer rodents? Huh? Answer me. No. Sob. No, Mommy." Lily burst into tears, the cry of absolute terror. "Then cry. Look at that lens. Imagine your father is gone for good. Imagine you've been thrown into a garbage dump. Cry tragically. Cry loudly so we can eat." Robert violently ripped the headphones off and slammed them onto the desk. He let out a ragged exhale, his chest heaving violently as if he had run a long distance. The inescapable nausea surged, and he quickly reached for the glass of water on the desk. But his hand trembled so much that water splashed out, soaking the files next to it. The naked truth was more horrifying than any nightmare he had ever experienced. There was no artistic passion, no innate talent. His daughter, his little princess, whom he thought was living in luxury, was actually confined in a mental prison built by her own mother. Victoria wasn't teaching her acting. She was psychologically tormenting the child. She used a child's greatest fears, the fear of abandonment by parents, the fear of starvation, to force Lily to produce perfect tears for the camera. Robert stared at Barnaby sitting impassively on the desk. Its black plastic eyes still reflected the screen's light like a silent witness who had just shed the burden of a secret. He had bought it to replace himself, and ironically, it had done a better job of fatherhood than he had. It listened to Lily, recorded her pain while he was absorbed in the numbers on the stock market. A wave of cold, molten rage erupted in Robert's core, urging him to rush to the bedroom, break down the door, and drag Victoria out to confront her. He wanted to scream at her, to throw her out of the house immediately. But then, the cold, calculated nature of a seasoned businessman who had navigated hundreds of high-stakes negotiations pulled him back. Robert took a deep breath, putting the glass down. He wiped the water from his lip, his eyes gradually becoming sharp and impassive. Confrontation now was pointless. Victoria was a skilled performer. She would deny everything, blame the pressure play the victim again, and claim he had doctored the audio. Given her influence on social media, an accusation without sufficient evidence would be spun into a weapon against him. He needed more. He needed an inescapable trap. He needed to permanently close the lid on this performance. Robert turned back to the computer. His fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, decisive and precise. He looked at the list of audio files in the right column. The scroll bar was still long. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was an ongoing process. He scrolled down, skimming past the files from yesterday, the day before last week. Barnaby's AI system had automatically tagged the content of each conversation for easy retrieval. His eyes stopped at a file recorded at midnight 2 days ago. The file title was not Child Interaction or Playtime. The AI had tagged this conversation as Asset Discussion and Legal Strategy. A shiver ran down Robert's spine. Why was there a discussion about assets in his daughter's room at midnight, and why legal strategy? Robert's hand, now steady and firm, moved the mouse to that file. His gaze dark and deep and unreadable. He knew that what he was about to hear next would not only reveal a mother's cruelty, but a carefully calculated plot to completely dismantle his life. He put the headphones back on. Click. The night in the penthouse remained silent, but in Robert's headphones, the real storm was just beginning. The blue light from the screen illuminated Robert's face, making his hard features look eerie like a wax statue. He sat motionless, leaning back in the chair, but his mind was being sucked into the vortex of a truth even more devastating than what he had just witnessed. The audio file tagged Crucial sat prominently on the screen like a Pandora's box waiting to be opened. Barnaby's AI had worked too well. It had filtered out the keywords money, lawyer, divorce, assets, words that should not exist in a happy family, and certainly not in a teddy bear's log. Robert pressed play. The first sound was not sobbing, but the clinking of glasses, followed by Victoria's sharp, clear laughter. This laughter was completely different from the feigned tenderness she displayed online. It was cold, crisp, and filled with a sense of triumph. The laughter of someone who had just won a big gamble. Cheers, Groy. The little one's performance today was outstanding, wasn't it? Victoria's voice was seductive and smug. Superb, Mrs. Sterling. Mr. Groy's voice replied, deep and sycophantic. That scene of her clutching the bear and weeping for her father, well, that's worth $1 million right there. I've color graded the footage to a cold gray tone. I guarantee anyone who watches it will shed tears of pity. Robert clenched his hand into a fist, his fingernails digging painfully into his skin. Mr. Groy was not an art film director. He was a notorious media spin expert, a professional merchant of emotion whom Robert had heard about in business circles. He was frequently hired to stage scandals to cleanse or smear opponents with terrifyingly authentic footage. Robert is so naive, Victoria continued, the sound of pouring wine audible. He thinks money can solve everything. He thinks by throwing expensive robots at her, he's fulfilled his fatherly duties. He has no idea that I'm going to use his own money to take his daughter away. Is the divorce plan still on track? Groy asked. Absolutely. I'll file next month. The videos of Lily crying because she misses her father, because she feels abandoned, those will be the nuclear weapons in court. I'll prove Robert's emotional abandonment caused severe depression in his daughter. My lawyer says with this evidence, I'm 100% sure to gain full custody and demand a 50% split of the assets. $50 million, Groy, freedom and wealth. Enough. In the cold study, Robert felt a colossal stone crushing his chest. He could barely breathe. His inattention, his long business trips, the gifts he substituted for presents, all had unknowingly created a deadly void. And Victoria had filled that void with a monstrous scheme. She didn't just want a divorce. She wanted to destroy him, to strip him of his fatherhood, using the very pain she inflicted on their daughter. But the recording didn't stop there. Something more horrifying was coming. But 50 million is just the beginning. Victoria's voice dropped full of dark ambition. Lily is not just a daughter, she is my startup vehicle. I've already signed a covert deal with the cosmetic brand DermaKid. They need a spokesperson for their Angel Tears product line for sensitive children. Clever, Groy praised. The image of a resilient single mother raising a psychologically wounded child. That story will sell like hotcakes. You bet. The child is a gold mine, Groy. It is a gold. Misery sells more than happiness. Audiences crave tragedy, they crave sympathy, and I will give them tragedy. I will turn Lily into the symbol of emotionally neglected children, and I will be the magnificent mother who shields her. The product will fly off the shelves, and I will be the new media queen. The laughter of the two conspirators rang out again, merging into a symphony of pure cruelty. Robert tore the headphones off and slammed them onto the desk. He buried his face in his hands. A feeling of revulsion rose in his throat. His daughter, his little Lily, was not only a victim of psychological abuse, but was being turned into a commodity, a cheap marketing tool for her mother's greed. This home was not a sanctuary. It was a factory producing commercialized tragedy, and Lily was the raw material. But Robert didn't allow himself to break down for long. The pain gave way to cold fury, and the fury translated into decisive action. He wiped his face, stood up, his eyes blazing with determination. He was no longer the manipulated husband. He was Robert Sterling, the man who built a tech empire from nothing, the man who never backed down from any competitor. And his greatest adversary was sleeping soundly in the next room. Robert returned to the computer. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, his actions swift and precise. He copied all the audio data video from the bear's hidden camera, along with Lily's biological log graph, onto an external secured hard drive. He created another backup on his personal 3-layer encrypted cloud storage. Next, he opened his email. Without much thought, he drafted an urgent message. Recipients: New York's top private attorney and the city police commissioner, an old friend he had previously provided technical support to. Subject: urgent evidence, child exploitation and extortion. He attached all the files he had just collected. No lengthy explanation, just the bare truth. Send. The status bar quickly hit 100%. Successfully sent. Robert leaned back in his chair, checking the wall clock. 5 a.m. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the New York sky was shifting from inky black to the gray-blue of dawn. The storm was over, leaving a stillness before the new storm was about to break. Robert's gaze changed. The confusion and remorse of the previous night were gone. In their place was the cold resolve of a father ready to declare war on the world to protect his child. He wouldn't allow Victoria to carry out her script for another second. He would rewrite the ending to this story, and in that ending, his daughter would be free. Clink. A soft sound from the kitchen echoed through the quiet hallway. The coffee maker started the clatter of knives and cutting boards. A new day had begun. Victoria was awake, preparing for her usual morning performance as the perfect mother. Robert stood up, adjusted his vest collar, and smoothed his messy hair. He picked up Barnaby from the desk, looking into its black plastic eyes one last time. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." He tucked the bear under his arm, walked out of the study, and strode purposefully toward the kitchen, where the live stream lights were waiting to expose the most brutal truth. The brilliant morning sun of New York poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden hue over the luxurious penthouse dining room. Victoria stood there, radiant as a queen in her kingdom. Her blonde hair was softly curled, her skin glowing under makeup that was flawless, down to every pore. She stood before a video stand wearing a radiant, practiced smile, welcoming the thousands of followers glued to their phones for her daily Happy Breakfast live stream. "Good morning, my angels. Today, Victoria is sharing a special brain boost smoothie recipe for the little ones. I promise they'll love it and become super smart." Lily sat on a high velvet chair. small and silent like an expensive porcelain doll. She wore a pink princess dress with too many layers of lace and bows, stiff and scratchy. In front of Lily was a plate of fruit intricately cut into cute animal shapes next to a glass of eye-catching green smoothie. But Lily wasn't eating. She knew the rule, don't touch the food until mommy says, cut. Her job was to sit still, smile demurely when her mother turned to her and be the perfect backdrop for the sacred motherhood picture Victoria was painting. Victoria chattered on about expensive organic nuts, occasionally turning to gently stroke Lily's hair, whispering trite terms of endearment for the camera to capture the moment. My precious Lily loves this too, don't you, sweetie? Lily nodded slightly, her eyes still fixed on the food, trying not to reveal the exhaustion from a sleepless night of fear. The sound of firm footsteps on the wooden floor broke the perfectly staged setting. Victoria paused for a second, the smile on her lips slightly rigid, but her professional acting instincts allowed her to quickly recover her natural look. She turned toward the door, intending to introduce her busy but always family-oriented husband to boost views and admiration from the audience. "Oh, look who's up early with us, it's Daddy Robert Lilly." But her words caught in her throat. Robert was not looking at the camera. He was not looking at his daughter with the usual apologetic gaze. He walked straight to the dining table, his cold, sharp eyes fixed on Victoria like a poisoned arrow. His presence carried an oppressive air that instantly extinguished the smile on Victoria's face. He calmly placed the AI robot teddy bear Barnaby onto the marble countertop right next to Lily's untouched plate. The bear sat there, its shiny black plastic eyes reflecting the light from the live stream, inanimate yet utterly threatening. "What do you think you're doing?" Victoria hissed through gritted teeth, still trying to hold a forced, distorted smile for the camera, but her eyes clearly betrayed panic. "We are live, don't make a scene." Robert didn't answer. He didn't need to argue. He reached out his thumb, pressing hard on the playback activation button hidden beneath the bear's soft fur. At the same time, his other hand turned the volume dial to the maximum level. Static. Crackle. A second of silence hung in the air before the truth erupted. The spiteful, vicious voice boomed from the bear's small but powerful speaker, tearing through the fake sweet morning atmosphere. It wasn't the gentle voice currently live streaming, but the voice of a devil from the night before. "You worthless child cry right now? Do you want to live on the street with the rats, huh?" The sound echoed, bouncing off the walls, traveling directly into the microphone of the phone that was streaming live. Victoria froze. She stared at the bear as if she had seen a ghost. The stream of verbal abuse continued relentlessly. "Look into the lens. Imagine your father is deceased. I need tears. I need money. You are my gold mine, understood? If you don't perform, I will throw you out of this house immediately." Her mocking laughter about the divorce plan, about turning Lily into a start-up vehicle, about deceiving the entire world, all sounded clear, raw, and merciless. On Victoria's phone screen, the chat window exploded. Comments scrolled too fast to read. Hearts and compliments disappeared, replaced by waves of angry emojis and shocked questions. "What is that? What is she saying? Oh my God, is that child being abused? Call the police." Victoria's face turned from ashen white to bright red. Her career, her reputation, the perfect image she had painstakingly built were crumbling before her eyes. She let out a frantic shriek and lunged to grab the bear, intending to smash it to turn off that infernal sound. But Robert was faster. He reached out, stopping his wife's action. His hand gripped Victoria's wrist with firm resolve, not violently, but enough to immobilize her. He looked straight into her eyes, his gaze filled with contempt and pity. "The world is hearing the real you, Victoria." Robert said, his voice low yet resonant, cutting through the chaotic noise from the violently vibrating phone. "The performance is over. Take your final bow." Victoria struggled, but in vain. She turned to look at Lily, intending to use her gaze to threaten the child as she usually did. But Lily did not look down this time. She sat on the high chair, her eyes wide, looking at her father. For the first time in her life, she saw her father not as the absent man who always vanished on business trips. He was standing there towering like a solid fortress wall, shielding her from her mother's frantic storm. Victoria's phone began ringing incessantly. Not calls from fans, they were Brand's partners frantically calling to cancel contracts to demand compensation. But the most terrifying sound was not the phone. The unmistakable sound of sirens wailed from the street below. Police sirens. They grew closer, louder, tearing through the quiet morning air of the affluent neighborhood, signaling the final collapse of an empire built on lies. The oak door of the penthouse burst open one last time. But this time there was no chaos of the previous night's raid. Instead, there was the authoritative and cold presence of the law. The police commissioner himself stepped in, accompanied by two stern-faced representatives from Child Protective Services CPS. They carried an emergency arrest warrant and a thick folder filled with the digital evidence provided by Robert. Victoria stumbled backward, tripping over the video stand, which crashed to the floor. Her phone flew across the room, the screen cracked but still streaming. The frame was now tilted, showing a close-up of the trembling bare feet of the woman, once known as a style icon, now cornered like hunted prey. "What are you doing? I'll sue you. This is a private residence!" Victoria shrieked, her voice thin with panic. She pointed at Robert, raving like a madwoman. "He set me up. That audio is fake. He used AI to harm me." "Mrs. Sterling, you have the right to remain silent," the commissioner said, his voice firm, cutting short her hysterics. He gestured toward the hallway where two officers were escorting a man into the room. "Mr. Groy." The bogus director was handcuffed, his head bowed, not daring to look up. He had been arrested in the building lobby while trying to flee with equipment full of evidence. Hoping for leniency, he had confessed everything: the staging contracts, the script for psychological abuse, and the plan to extort Robert. Groy's appearance was the final blow, shattering all of Victoria's excuses. She gasped, frozen on the spot. Every lie, every calculation was exposed in the light of day. Two female officers approached. They were not rough, but they were decisive. One read Victoria her Miranda rights, every phrase sounding like a verdict: charges of child exploitation, extortion, and commercial fraud. The other officer pulled out a pair of gleaming metal restraints from her belt. Click. The cold sound of metal snapped shut as the restraints locked onto the meticulously cared-for hands that had repeatedly struck her daughter's self-esteem instead of offering comfort. Lily slipped off the high chair in fear. She was not old enough to understand the complex legal concepts unfolding. She only saw her mother, the most powerful woman in her world, being led away by strangers. By a natural childish instinct, she started to run toward her mother. "Mommy," Lily called softly, her voice trembling. Robert dropped to his knees. He spread his arms, catching his daughter just as she took a few steps. He embraced Lily tightly, turning her so her head rested against his shoulder, shielding her view. He did not want the last image of her mother in her childhood memory to be that of a shackled criminal being led away. "It's all right, sweetheart," Robert whispered into her ear, his hand gently stroking Lily's messy hair, his voice choked with suppressed emotion. "It's all right. Daddy is here now." Lily's small body stiffened for a moment, then gradually relaxed. She smelled her father's familiar cologne, felt the steady rhythm of his heart beating in his chest. "No one has to make you perform anymore." Robert continued, every word a sacred promise. "From now on, you only have to be Lily. No roles to play. Never again. You don't need to cry for money, and you don't need to smile to please anyone, I promise." Feeling true safety, not the fake security under stage lights, the tough facade Lily had been forced to wear for so long crumbled. She burst into tears. Clean, clear sobs of a 6-year-old child, not the dramatic, tragic wails of her mother's script, but the cathartic release of all the suppressed pain, fear, and pressure weighing down her young soul. The CPS representative observed the scene, her eyes softening. She nodded gently to Robert, a silent confirmation that temporary custody would be granted to him under supervision. It was trust, rebuilt from the ashes, a second chance for Robert to learn how to truly be a father. The footsteps of the police in Victoria faded away, disappearing behind the elevator doors. The vast penthouse gradually grew quiet, returning to its true state. Only the father and daughter remained amidst the wreckage of overturned filming equipment, scattered phone fragments, and the broken pieces of lies. The sunlight shone down on them bright and warm, no longer obscured by artificial reflectors or dark dramatic staging. Robert slowly stood up, lifting Lily into his arms. She wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, burying her face into his shoulder, still whimpering. He walked past the debris on the floor, straight out onto the windy balcony. The wind from the Hudson River blew strongly, carrying the fresh breath of freedom. "Breathe it in, sweetie," Robert said softly, looking out at the clear blue New York sky. "This is the air of freedom." He let his daughter breathe the first air of a new life, leaving behind the glittering but confined past where living dolls had to perform for the greed of adults. Now, only Lily and her father remained with a future that was unscripted, but would surely be written with genuine love. 3 months, 90 days. Not a long time in a person's life, but enough to completely change its trajectory. New York, with its sun-blocking skyscrapers and never-ending sirens, was far behind in the rearview mirror. Now, Robert and Lily's world was confined to a farmhouse deep in the Hudson Valley suburbs. There were no private elevators to the penthouse, no glamorous fundraising galas, and absolutely no lurking camera lenses. There was only the rustling of the wind through the old oak trees and the sound of birds singing in the early morning. Robert knelt on the damp earth, his hands, which once signed million-dollar contracts, now smudged with mud. He wore a faded t-shirt and threadbare jeans, an outfit the Robert of 3 months ago would never have considered. But the current Robert felt more comfortable than ever. He was carefully using a small trowel to loosen the soil, preparing for the first sunflower seeds. "Daddy, look, that earthworm is enormous. Mate." Lily's cheerful shout rang out clear and crisp like a wind chime. She scampered from the corner of the garden holding a wriggling earthworm in her hand, showing no fear. Lily wore baggy denim overalls stained with mud, her blonde hair tied up naturally, not in the perfectly styled curls of before. Her face was smudged with brown dirt, but her eyes were sparkling brightly, glistening with the vitality of a truly happy child. Robert laughed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his hand, leaving a long streak of dirt. He looked at his daughter, his heart filled with a strange sense of peace that all his previous wealth could never buy. "Whoa, you found an excellent gardening assistant," Robert teased, pretending to be surprised. "This worm will help loosen the soil so our sunflowers can grow tall. Put it down gently, okay? Don't hurt it." Lily nodded eagerly, carefully placing the earthworm into the newly tilled soil, then gently patted the top as if tucking a baby in. She giggled when a yellow butterfly unexpectedly landed on the tip of her nose. With the reflex of her old life, Lily momentarily froze her eyes, quickly darting around as if searching for a camera lens, her face muscles briefly tightening in preparation for an acting smile. But then she realized no one was there. Just Daddy the garden and the butterfly. The forced smile vanished, replaced by a mischievous wrinkle of her nose that sent the butterfly fluttering away. It was a purely beautiful moment, fleeting, and not captured on any film reel for profit, but it was etched forever into Robert's heart. "I'm going to get the water to give my worm friend a drink," Lily announced, then spun around and toddled toward the wooden porch, her red rubber boots making a joyful clop-clop sound on the gravel path. Robert watched his daughter's small back, his smile softening, tinged with contemplation. The past 3 months had been a difficult healing journey. During the first nights here, Lily often woke up startled, screaming because she dreamed her mother made her perform the abandonment scene again. At some meals, she wouldn't dare touch her food, until Robert nodded permission, the fear of starvation deeply ingrained in her subconscious. Robert had to learn how to be a father from scratch, not with expensive gifts or highly paid nannies, but with patience, tight hugs whenever she was frightened, and his non-stop 24/7 presence. And then, little by little, the layer of fear thawed. Lily began demanding ice cream, getting pouty when she couldn't watch TV and running around until she scraped her knees without fear of being scolded for ruining her image. She was learning how to be a normal child, and Robert was learning how to be a normal father. Lily climbed the porch steps, reaching for the small elephant-shaped watering can. Her gaze inadvertently swept across the sturdy oak shelf built into the porch wall well above her head. There, nestled among small cactus pots and a few gardening books, sat a familiar object, Barnaby the teddy bear. Its fur had been washed clean, soft as new, but the black plastic eyes no longer flashed the red warning light. The connection cable behind its back had been removed. It sat there quiet and inanimate, like a historical witness who had completed its mission. Lily tilted her head, looking up at her old friend, with curiosity mixed with a little nostalgia. "Daddy," she called out to the garden. Her voice tinged with a question. Why doesn't Barnaby talk anymore? Why don't his eyes light up? Robert stopped working, dusted the dirt off his pants, and quickly walked toward the porch. He stood by his daughter, gently lifting her high so her eyes were level with the teddy bear. Lily reached out to touch Barnaby's soft velvet nose, petting its round ears. "Barnaby is taking a long rest, sweetheart," Robert explained, his voice low and tender. He looked at the bear with profound gratitude, as if looking at a comrade who had helped him through life and death. "He worked very hard to protect you, to help Daddy understand what you needed. Now that his job is done, he needs quiet rest." Lily tilted her head in thought, her big eyes blinking. "Then who will keep me safe if someone bad comes? Who will tell Daddy if I'm sad?" Robert turned his daughter around so she was looking straight into his eyes. He placed his hand over his left chest where his heart was beating steadily, firmly. "From now on, I will do that," he said with conviction. "I will be your protector 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No battery needed, no wires to plug in, and I will never run out of energy. I will be right next to you, listening to you, and you will never need a teddy bear to call Daddy home again. I promise." It was a promise as heavy as a mountain, a lifelong commitment Robert engraved in his heart. He had once entrusted his child to technology and money and almost lost her forever. That mistake would never be repeated. Lily looked at her father, then at Barnaby. She smiled, a look of absolute trust and relief. She leaned forward and planted a soft kiss on the teddy bear's forehead. "Thank you, Barnaby. Sleep well," she whispered to her old friend. Then Lily turned to hug Robert's neck, burrowing her head into his shoulder. "I like Daddy protecting me better. Daddy is warmer than Barnaby." Robert felt a stinging in his nose. He hugged his daughter tightly, inhaling the scent of sun and fresh earth in her hair. "I like protecting you most in the world, too." He put Lily down. She grabbed the elephant watering can, full of energy again. "I'm going to water the flowers now. Hurry up, Daddy, or the worms will crawl away." With that, she scurried into the garden, her clear laughter echoing through the quiet space. Robert leaned against the wooden porch column, crossing his arms, watching his daughter run free under the bright sunlight. No script required her to cry, no director forced her to perform tragedy. There was only childhood being healed every day, every hour, through genuine love and complete presence. Robert's pants pocket vibrated softly. He reached in and pulled out his latest smartphone. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, emails from his lawyer about the progress of Victoria's case. She was facing a long prison sentence for child exploitation and extortion messages from company shareholders wanting him back at the helm, and tabloid news still dissecting the Sterling family scandal. The outside world was still noisy, still spinning with fame and money, but that world no longer had a place in this garden. Robert didn't unlock the screen. He pressed and held the power button. Power off. The screen went dark, reflecting his serene face. Robert tossed the phone gently onto the wicker sofa on the porch. It lay there silent and useless, just like Barnaby on the shelf. He walked down the steps, striding toward the sun-drenched garden. "Lily, watch out, I'm the mud monster," Robert growled playfully, spreading his dirt-covered hands wide. Lily shrieked with delight, running around the flower beds, but intentionally slowing down for her father to catch her. Robert dashed over, enveloping his little daughter in his arms as she charged toward him. With the momentum of the chase, father and daughter tumbled onto the soft green lawn. Robert lay on his back, Lily nestled on his stomach, both roaring with laughter, their sounds blending with the wind echoing beneath the vast cloudless blue sky. In that moment, Robert realized a simple truth that had taken him half a lifetime to discover. The true value of life was not in the numbers in his bank account or the applause of strangers. It was right here, in this mud-stained embrace, in the laughter of a child who was allowed to simply be herself. The garden had no cameras, but it preserved the most beautiful, most genuine footage of a family finding their way back to each other from the abyss. And this time, the script of their lives would be written by them in the ink of love and freedom. And that concludes tonight's bedtime story. We truly hope this journey from the chaos of the city penthouse to the peaceful safety of the Hudson Valley farmhouse was a meaningful one for you. Stories like Robert and Lily's remind us that even the darkest times can lead to heartwarming stories of change and unconditional love. We'd love to hear your reflections. What part of Robert's transformation resonated with you the most? Did you feel a sense of relief when Lily finally found her true voice and freedom in the garden? Thank you so much for staying with us through this deeply touching story. As you settle in for the night, let this be our takeaway. Never underestimate the value of your presence in the lives of your loved ones. The most sophisticated technology in the world cannot replace a simple, heartfelt hug. May your night be peaceful, and may you cherish every moment with those who matter most.